Hey coders, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to finally start the backend of our Realtor website. We have already completed the front end. If you haven't watched those videos, you can check it out on my channel. Now back to our current video. So in this video, we are going to lay the foundation for the MVC framework. MVC stands for Model View Controller. It is a very popular style of implementing your full stack web application. So basically, you divide your whole application into three parts. We have models, which basically interact with our database. We have views, which display the pages that you see in the browser. And then we have controllers, which kind of acts as a coordinator between all three components. So when a request arrives to the server, there is another component called a router, which looks at the request, and based on that request, the router decides which controller should handle this request. So when the controller is decided, the request is redirected or sent to the controller takes over, and if the controller realizes that there is a need to involve the database, then it involves a model through which the communication with the database is handled, and when the final result of the query or whatever is the request is done, then the data that needs to be displayed is sent to the view, and the view will incorporate the data in the web page that we finally see in the browser. So this is the crux of model view controllers. So we are going to implement a basic MVC framework along with the router. We will also be implementing clean URLs. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so we are starting with a clean slate. As you can see, this is our VS Code editor where we have this empty root folder called Realtor-Backend. So now we are going to create certain folders which you often encounter in two different MVC frameworks. So the number or the name of the folders that you see in an MVC framework varies, but at the very minimum level, it at least have two folders. One is called public and another is usually called app. You can give it any name you like. Now in this app folder, you usually keep one PHP file called index.php file. This file acts as an entry point to your application. You can give it any name you like, but it's usually named index because if the name is index, most of the servers can automatically display it. If you don't provide the name into the URL, it will still be picked up by the server and displayed in the browser. So index.php is the name which is usually used for the entry point to your application. So let's create that file in the public folder. Index.php, and as content, let's just, for the time being, just print index.php file contents. That's it for the time being. Okay. Now this F folder usually contains multiple subfolders. Let's define models folder. Then we have views folder and controllers folder. So all the controllers will be placed into this folder. The models will go into this folder and the views will go into this folder. We also have another folder usually named core. This core folder is going to contain the core or the building blocks upon which these controllers, models or views will build up. So if there is a functionality which is needed by all the controllers, we define that functionality as a separate controller which we place into this core folder, and the other controllers that we implement will extend that controller from this core folder. Same goes for the models. We will have one main model in the core folder, and the models that we define over here will extend that model folder, and same applies to the views folder. Okay. As we progress further along in this project, we will be adding more folders, and we might need to add more file into this structure as well. But for the time being, this is the structure that we are going to stick to. Now let's go to the index.php file, and as we said, this index.php file is going to be the entry point. Now what do we mean by the entry point? So basically by entry point, what is meant is, so as you notice over here, this is URL. This whole thing is treated as a domain name, and for the path, if you notice, it's empty, but we are still seeing our landing page. Now if you add home to it, we'll still see the same landing page. If we click on this rent, now the URL has changed, just the path part has changed. The domain name is same, however the whole URL as a result is a different URL, and we see this rent page which contains all the properties that are available in the market to be rent. Then if you click on the buy, you see all the properties which are available in the market to be sold. If we click on any of these properties, now we see a different URL which has the path part property/4. This 4 is dynamic. Depending on the property, it will keep changing. So this is property number 3. And let's say this is property number 1. So this part keeps changing. That means this part is dynamic. The property is constant for this URL. So these are different URLs. So what is meant by entry point is that no matter what you type into this address bar, each request should get redirected to index.php page. So this is what is meant by entry point. So we have to make this index.php file our entry point. Now in order to make it entry point, we have to define certain configurations for the server. Now since I'm using XAMPP web stack, so that means the server I'm using is Apache server. Now in order to define those configurations for our Apache server, we have to create a file called .htaccess. Since our index.php file is in the public folder, we have to make sure that our htaccess is also defined there in the same folder, .htaccess. This file doesn't have any name, just the extension .htaccess. The reason we want to define htaccess into the same folder in which we have index.php is number one, we want to make this index.php as the entry point, and number two, the path that htaccess uses are with respect to the folder in which it's defined. So since it's defined in the public folder, so it will treat this public folder as the root folder. So up till this point, that is the localhost /realtor-backend/public, that whole part will be the domain name. So anything which is followed by /public will be considered the URL path. And this is what we want. We want to ignore this first part, localhost realtor-backend/public, because this will be the domain name for all our pages. Only the part that comes after public is different, and we only want to capture that part. So it's very important that you define htaccess into the folder up to which you want to treat that path as the domain name. So we want to treat up to this part the domain name and index.php as the entry point. So these two are defined into this public folder. Okay, now it's time to define those configurations for the server. So those configurations will change the default configurations of the Apache server. So in order to direct the Apache server to change the default configurations, first of all, we have to enable its rewrite engine on. By default, it's off. So if it's off, no matter what kind of reconfigurations you define over here, they will not take effect. So the first thing that we have to do is enable the rewrite engine. So we are setting rewrite engine on. It's capital E. Okay. Rewrite engine on. Now we have to define the rewrite rule. So rewrite rule is the rule which will change the default configurations of the Apache server. So the rule that we want to define is we want to make this index.php as the entry point. And by entry point, we just discussed what is meant by entry point. No matter what you type into the address bar, the request should land us into index.php page. So we have to capture what has been typed into the URL. So we have to say no matter what has been typed into the address bar. So to say that, you can simply say dot asterisk. So we are defining this logic into regular expression language. So in regular expressions, the dot means any character, and this asterisk means 0 or more occurrence of this character, which simply means infinite characters. So no matter what character it is, and no matter what is the length of that string, all should be captured. So this dot followed by asterisk means any string of any length. But we have to ensure that we are covering from beginning to end whole string, not any string, all string. So if we don't define the beginning and end, it could check just first part of the URL or the middle or the center or any portion of the URL, and the rule will be applied. So we want to ensure the whole string is taken into consideration. So in order to say from beginning, so we are going to prepend it with caret, and then for the end we have to append $sign. So $sign means end, caret means beginning. So from beginning to end, take all the characters, and then we want to send it to index.php. So we are saying no matter what the URL is, send the request to index.php. So this rewrite rule says no matter what you type into the URL, and by URL we mean the path that comes after the domain name. So whatever you type into that URL path, send the request to index.php in any case. Let's check if that is the case. So realtor backend, and then we have public folder, and since we don't have anything, okay, let's remove it. Now public, and we can see index.php file contents. So we have been returned this index file. Let's play something else. We don't have any URL, this URL, or any file that starts with this name, and yet we will be redirected back to index.php file. You can see the contents of index.php file. If you keep adding anything to the URL, we will still be seeing the contents of this PHP file. So that was the thing that we wanted to do. No matter what you type into the URL, redirect it to index.php file, that is, serve that index.php file. Now the next thing that we have to modify into the rewrite rule is once the index.php file receives the request, based on that path, it has to serve different web pages. Like if it is a property one, then this is the page that needs to be served. If it's property/6, then this is the page that needs to be served. If it's home, then the landing page should be served. If it's torrent, then this is the page that needs to be served. If it's 2by, then this is the page that needs to be served. So index.php file needs to really figure out what is the path that comes after the domain name, because that path will decide what content should be served. So for that, the index.php file needs to have access to that URL path. Now we have a global variable, we can utilize that, which is server global variable, and the path that we can utilize is this request URI. Let's display it and see what contents are being displayed in the browser. Okay, so as you can see, it displays this whole path. So localhost is treated as the domain name, Realtor backend and public is treated as the path. Now this is the true representation. This part is the domain, the actual domain, and the rest is the actual URL path. But because the placement of the htaccess treats the domain and URL path differently, and since we have placed our htaccess into this public folder, so Apache server treats this whole part as the domain name. Even this slash is included. Okay. So for the Apache server, this is the domain, and this is what we are interested in. Of course, if we have access to only this thing, we can trim this part, we can remove slash realtor backend and public manually, and this slash as well, and then we can figure out what to do, what kind of path it is, and based on it, we can figure out what content to serve. But if Apache server is able to trim this part for us, and not this app, okay. So if Apache server can readily trim this part for us, then why shall we define the logic to manually remove this part? Why not utilize the Apache server? This is one reason we don't have to work for it, and the other reason is if later on we change the directory structure, then we will have to redefine the logic which trims this part. But if we have utilized the functionality offered to us by the Apache server, then we will be really set and we won't need to redefine or change any logic there as well. So that's another advantage. So we are going to utilize the Apache server's capability. Now Apache server does gives us this index.php file. The only thing now we have to do is we have to take this part and give it to index.php file as well. So for that, what we are going to do is we are going to utilize capturing group and back referencing. So if you have defined capturing group in your regular expression, then you can reference back to that group through a variable. That's why the name back referencing. So in order to define a capturing group, you have to enclose that portion of the regular expression within parentheses. So we want to capture all the text of the URL. So that means this is the part that we want to capture through capturing group. So we have to simply enclose it within the parentheses. This caret and this asterisk was kind of helper things to ensure that you have to capture the whole string. However, the string itself is captured through this part. That's why we have enclosed this into parentheses. Now, because this has been enclosed into parentheses, that means it has been turned into a capturing group. So any string which matches this part, which will be the URL, in our case, everything that comes after the public folder, that will be captured. Now we can reference back to it through some referencing variable. So when a capturing group is created, it automatically gets stored into default variables. Now there can be multiple capturing groups in our regular expressions, but in our case, since we are capturing whole URL into one group, so in our case there will only be one capturing group. And if it's the only capturing group, that means it's the first capturing group. So that means everything is stored in a variable named $1. If we had multiple capturing groups, the second text or string would have been stored into $2 variable. If there was a third capturing group, it would have been stored into $3 capturing group. So these are the default names which gets automatically given if we are defining capturing groups in regular expressions. Okay, so this is it. But obviously we can't directly send it to index.php. We have to define a way. So if it's index.php and we want to send that URL to index.php, so we have to append this thing as a query string to our URL. So index.php, then question mark, because after question mark comes query string. So now query string is a key value pair. You can give any name for the key. In our case, we are going to use URL because it is going to contain the URL. So URL equals $1. Now within the index.php, we can use the get global variable and we can reference to that URL with the index name URL to access the URL path. But for some reason, the Apache server needs another kind of flag to be added to it so that that part actually get attached to index.php, this as a query string. So we have to attach another flag which is called QSA, that means query string append. So we are appending query string to our index.php. So this is what it's telling, okay? And then it usually contains, without any space, it usually contains L. L means this is the last rule. So if we had multiple rules defined over here, then if this rule gets executed, that means the other rules will not execute because of this L flag. So that's why this L is necessary. In our case, it's not necessary because we only have one rule, but it's a kind of convention, and for it to make it future proof, it's better to place an L anyway. Okay, so now we are not only getting redirected to index.php, but through this variable, we can access the URL path in our index.php as well. So let's go back and now dot and then some space. Okay, now echo get global variable and we have to access the URL index name. Okay, now let's see what it prints. Okay, so index.php file contains, then so this part is returned because of the server global variables request URI index name. Then this URL is, and then this get global variable is returning us just the unique part, this one, which matches this one. If you attach something over here, and you can see this is, so this was the part which was important for index.php file to have access to, because based on that part the decision will be made which file needs to be returned as a HTTP response. Okay, now if this is the total contents of htaccess, then we have a problem, which is, let's define another file in the public folder named temp.php. Now this temp.php file actually exists on our folder. Let's echo something. This is temp file content. Now if the file actually exists on the server, we don't want to be redirected to index.php file, rather we want to be served this temp.php file directly. But if this is the current state of our htaccess file, then we will never see this temp.php file's contents. Let me show you. So after public, we have a file named temp.php, and if you can still see, we are only seeing the contents of index.php file, not the temp.php file, not the temp.php file's contents. So we have to modify our htaccess file such that if you are directly requesting a file which exists on our server, then do not redirect the request to index.php file, rather serve that file directly. And why do we need it? Because, let me show you, let me open the developers tool. Okay, let's refresh it. This is by. Okay, so this is the URL that we requested, localhost realtor/by. So this was the explicit request that we made by typing the URL into the address bar and hitting enter. But in order to display the contents for this particular web page, the browser behind the scene sent separate requests to request all of these files separately. So all these files were also requested behind the scenes in order for this by page to be displayed in the browser. If the htaccess file is in the state which it currently is, then these files will be blocked and the request for these files will be sent to index.php file as well, and there we really don't define the logic how to serve style.css files or images or the JavaScript files. So basically we want to ensure if the HTTP request is about style files or JavaScript files or images, then the request should not be redirected to index.php file, rather those files should be immediately served without rerouting to index.php file. So for that we have to make certain changes to our htaccess file. So basically the rule that we have to define is, if the file or the folder that we are requesting actually exists on the server, then do not go to this rewrite rule. Do not execute this rule and serve that file immediately. So this is the logic that we have to define. So basically these are conditions. So if certain conditions are true, only then this rewrite rule will execute. So the conditions that we have to use over here is if the requested file name does not exist on the server, and if the requested directory name do not exist on the server. So to do that, we have to define rewrite condition, and we have to take the file system path. So to get the file system path, we have to use % and these curly brackets, and there we have to use request underscore file name. We have to ensure it's not some file that exists on the server. For the file, copy paste, and it should not be a directory on the server. So if it's not a file that exists on the server, and if it's not a directory that exists on the server, only then rewrite this rule or execute this rewrite rule. Okay, now we should be able to see the contents of this temp.php file if we directly ask for this temp.php file. Okay, there is this parenthesis. Let's remove it. Okay, let's refresh, and as you can see, now we are seeing the contents of the temp file itself. So this part is sorted as well. Now the next part is, once we successfully reach index.php file has to look at the URL path, and based on it, it has to decide which file needs to execute to serve this HTTP request. So that means our index.php file should be aware of what are the legal URLs that the project recognizes. For example, okay, so this /by/rent/home property/property/id. So these are all valid URLs. But if you type something over here, now this is not a valid URL. So index.php file first of all has to figure out what are the valid URLs, because once we receive the valid URL, only then we can send the appropriate content back to the browser. So, okay, let's comment this out now. Let's keep it for the time being. Okay, let's comment it as well. Okay, so the step 1 is we have to register valid URLs with the index.php file. Okay. Step 2 is we have to map each URL with certain PHP class or file. So we need to map each URL with certain class or with certain PHP class or file. So this acts like a dictionary. In one column you have a word and the other column shows the meaning. So we have the same concept over here. In one column we have a URL, and in the other column we have the information about which file needs to be executed when that URL is triggered. So this is part 2. Then the step 3 is send or dispatch is the more technical term. Dispatch the request to the relevant class or file to be executed. So this is the last part. Once we figure out what is the URL and which class or PHP file needs to be executed for that URL request, then we have to actually trigger that PHP class file to serve that request. So we call that dispatching the request to the relevant file to be executed, or relevant class to be executed. So this is part 3. So these are the 3 steps that we have to define over here in our entry point. But usually these 3 steps are defined into a separate class, which we usually call a router, because we are routing the request to appropriate channels. So that's why it's called routing, and we usually define this logic separately. So let's define a class called router which will have this logic defined. So we are going to go into the app folder because we don't want this logic to be accessible to our clients. That's why it can't be in the public folder. It's going to be in the app folder. So whatever is in the public folder could be accessed or viewed by the user in the browser, and we don't want our actual logic to be viewed by the browser, because then we will be vulnerable to cyber attacks. Okay, so let's define a class router.php file. Okay, I created a folder. I needed to define a file router.php. Okay. Currently it's empty. Okay. We are going to get into this part later, but in this app folder, what we are going to do is there. Okay, we have already defined controllers, modules, views. Okay, fine. Okay. Now let's bring back these steps. So we need to define this logic into the router. So control X, and paste it over here. So these are the 3 steps that needs to be implemented in this class. So we have to register the valid URLs. Okay. Now, in order to register the valid URLs, that means we have to store this information into the router as long as this website is live on the server. So if we have to store this information, then we need some kind of storage unit. So we are going to define a variable. Let's make it a private variable. We don't want it to be accessed outside this router. So these are going to be routes. So let's give it the name route. And it's going to have at least 2 pieces of information. Like we said, it's a dictionary. At one side, we have this URL, and at the other side, we have this PHP file. So because at least we have 2 pieces of information, that means we need array as a data structure to store this information. Let's keep it empty for the time being because we do not have any routes, and those will be stored dynamically as well. Now, the other thing that we have to do is that this is the storage in which we are going to store them, but we need logic which will actually store the information into this array. So the logic that we want to implement is, so as we know that URLs comprises of HTTP requests. So whenever you type some URL, a HTTP request gets sent from the browser to the server. And with each HTTP request, there is certain kind of verb associated with any HTTP request. Those verbs are get request, post request, put request, fetch or update request, and then we have delete request. So we have 5 HTTP requests that we can send from the browser to the server. Ideally, the MVC framework should be able to handle all of these 5 requests, but we won't be needing the other 3 requests. We will be mostly using get request. Only for the form, the contact us form, we will be using post request, put, fetch, and delete. We won't be needing them, so we are not going to consider them. So at least we have 2 different kind of HTTP requests that needs to be handled. So we are going to define 2 functions, one for the get request and one for the post request. So public function get, let's copy paste it. The get method will register the get URLs, and the post one will register the post URLs. So these 2 will together register the URLs with certain PHP classes or files. Currently they are empty. We don't know what the parameters of the get are and what's the parameter of the post. But these two functions are part of this step 2 registration. Then the third part is going to be dispatching the request to the appropriate class, the action of actually triggering that class. So that means we have to define this function, public function dispatch. Currently all three are empty because we don't know how to do the registration or dispatch at the moment. However, what we are going to do is that we are just displaying an echo message for the time being. Get method triggered, post method triggered, and dispatch method triggered. Semicolon. Okay. Now let's go back to the index.php. Now we have this router class, so we can create an instance of this router class. So router equals new router, and now we have to register the URL. So router get. So now for the get method, the first parameter is going to be the path. So if it's home path, that is like this, if it's home, then the second parameter is going to be which PHP file or class name or class is going to handle this request. Now if it's a class, that means it will comprise of methods. So we not only have to define the class name, we also have to define which specific method of that class is going to handle that request. So we have two pieces of information, so we are going to pass it as a parameter. Collectively, these two will act as a handler. So when this URL is received, then this is the handler that will handle the request. So in this array, the first one is going to be the class name. So let's give it home controller. This is a class name. We don't have this class name defined yet. And the second one is going to be the method. So we are saying we have a class name home controller, which has a method named index. Whenever we receive this URL, trigger this class's this method to serve this request. So this is what we are doing over here. So we are getting complaint because for the get method, we haven't defined any parameters. So let's go back to our get method, and now we know it needs two parameters. The first one is the path, or let's give it the name URL, and the second one is the handler. What we can do is that we can echo out the URL that we received, and we can also echo out the handler. Now we know handler is actually an array, so we need print r because echo will not print it. So print r and control paste. Okay. So this is registration. However, this get method, we are only receiving this information, but it's not getting permanently stored in our routes. So this part is still missing, but let's just see if we are able to trigger this method with this information for the time being. Okay, I'm sure we will run into problems, but let's run into problems first and then we'll see how to resolve them. Okay, public, and then it's home. It says fatal error, class router not found. Okay, well, it makes sense. We are defining a router class. We are creating an object of type router over here. But if you notice, this router exists into a separate directory, and we haven't yet included it through include or require statement. Without that, obviously, this file, the logic that we have defined in the router is not part of this index.php file, so it's not aware of the existence of this router class. Okay, so let's temporarily include this. So we are in the public folder. Our index.php file is in the public folder, so we have to go one folder up. One folder up is the root directory, which is this realtor-backend. From there, we have to go back into this app folder, and there we have this router.php file. Okay, let's refresh, and now it says get triggered. Then this is the URL home, and the second one is the array. First index is home controller, and the index number at index 1, we have this index method. So we are able to successfully trigger the get method of the router, and we are successfully passing the appropriate information to it as well. Okay, so this is one part. Now if you notice, I have manually included the router file into this index file. So in our project, we are going to have multiple files, and that means each file will have multiple includes to include this file. So this is sort of manual, and we don't want to make it manual. We want to utilize the autoloading capability of the PHP. So in order to utilize autoloading, we are first of all going to need namespaces. So if we have namespaces defined, then we don't have to worry about the exact file system path of any file. We will use the use statement for the namespace. So this way, our classes will be free from the exact file system path on the server. We will be using the logical path through namespaces. So what we are going to do is, let's go to the app folder and we have this router. Let's give it some namespace. So namespace is going to be, we haven't yet defined any namespace. Let's give it the same name, app. So now we have placed the router class in the namespace, which is called app. We can give it any namespace name. Let's make it realtor for the time being, just to show you that the directory structure and the namespaces do not need to have the same names. So a router file is inside a folder named app, but for the namespace, we have chosen the name realtor. Now this is the namespace. We have to define in the root folder a file called composer.json. Now in this composer.json file, we have to define how does our namespaces maps to actual directories. So if it's a JSON file, we have to place everything within these curly brackets. So placing something into curly brackets turns into a JSON object, basically an object. But since we are in the JSON, so this is a JSON object. Now this JSON object can have multiple attributes. One of those attributes is autoload. This autoload is in turn another object which contains different properties, but the property over here we are interested in is what kind of convention or version we want to use for the autoloading. So we are interested in PSR4 version, which is again an object. Now within that object, so the kind of convention that we want to use for the autoloading is PSR4. There are two versions. PSR0 is, convention is not the right word. We can say the standard. So there are two standards for autoloading, PSR0 and PSR4. We are using PSR4 standard. Okay. Now in this standard, we have to map the namespaces with the physical directory structure. So we have used the namespace realtor / and we are mapping it with the actual directory. So actual directory in our case is app / comma. Okay, so whenever we use the namespace realtor, because namespaces uses / but the directory structure uses /. So for the / we have to use escape character, because for the JSON this / has a meaning. So we have to escape it by placing another /. So whenever the namespace starts with the realtor, it means you have to start with a folder or directory named app. So this is all we are saying. Now for the time being, we don't have anything else for the composer. So now we have to initialize our composer. Now this initialization of the composer, what it will do, it will look at the JSON file, and based on it, it will create all the required pieces needed to satisfy the instructions over here. Now currently we don't have anything other than the autoloading related information. So only this thing will be implemented. So what it will do is that it will create a vendor folder, and within that vendor folder, the autoload.php file will be created. So let's go to the terminal and just say composer install. Okay, so since there was nothing to install, but by looking at it, it realized there is no composer.log file present. So it basically what it did was it created a vendor folder. Within that vendor folder we have composer folder and this file autoload.php in which we were interested, and there is this composer.log file has also been created. Okay, so now the composer is able to understand this realtor. What does this realtor namespace mean? So we have to go to index.php and we have to use that namespace, which is realtor/router. Now this router will be automatically loaded, and we don't need to include or require with full path name, absolute path name. We don't need to do that. Okay. Realtor router not found. Oh, I remember. Well, we don't need to use require or include for the whole project anywhere. However, in the index.php, which is our entry point, we have to include the autoload file, because if the autoload.php file is not included, then it will not be able to recognize this statement, and as a result, this router file will not be automatically loaded. So we just have to include the autoload.php file in the index.php file. So let's require once, and we have to check where our autoload.php file is. So we are in the index.php file. We are in the index.php file, which is inside the public folder. So we have to go up to the root folder. So go one folder up. Now we are in the root directory. There we have a folder named vendor. So vendor, and there we have this autoload.php file present. Okay. Now the autoloading will work for our whole project. We will never ever have to use this statement anywhere else in the project. Okay, let's refresh and we are able to see the contents of the router file. Okay, so that part is done. Now what are we supposed to do? So now we can actually work on the router. So currently in the index one, we have registered just one URL, which is home, with a controller named home controller and its index method. We have to create this controller method yet. We haven't defined that yet, but let's go back to the router and let's complete the rest of the logic, which is basically everything. We haven't yet defined anything as long as the router is concerned. In fact, let's go back to our index.php file and at least have the different kind of URLs that we are going to get. Let me just copy paste it. So we are going to have at least one request, which is going to be a HTTP post request. We are going to keep the path and the controller that handles it the same. And we are getting this kind of complaint because for the post method in the router class, we haven't defined any parameters for the post. That's why it's complaining. So in the router, let's copy these two parameters for the get method and paste it for the post method. Now both of them have same parameters. Okay. For the body, let's copy and paste them. Let's go back to index. Now we don't see any complaint. Okay. Now the another kind of routing that we want our router to be able to handle is, instead of taking us to some class, some controller class, we want this function, the router's function, to handle that request itself. So the function should be able to handle not only this class name, but it should also be able to handle some callback function. So let me first define it. So let's say the URL, let's use a different URL. The method is get, HTTP method is get, and the URL, let's give it the name test. Now, instead of defining some controller class and its associate method, we are going to define some function, some callback function right here. Then if our URL path is test, then that function will be executed immediately. So function is going to be, let's just echo, this is callback function talking. So we want our router to be able to handle these type of routes as well. So this is another one. Now the third one is going to be, if you remember for the properties page, the portion of the path is dynamic. So after the domain, we have /property and then /the ID of the property. If the property has the ID 1, then after the property comes /1. If the ID of the property is 5, then after the property comes /5. So our router should be able to handle those kind of routes as well. There is an extra E over here. Let's remove it. Okay. So let's define that route as well. So router get. So the URL is going to be property / and then this part is dynamic. It keeps changing with each property. So we have to kind of provide here some kind of variable whose value will keep on changing. So in order to give or define a dynamic parameter in the URLs, we have to enclose it within the curly brackets and let's give it some name. Since in our case the URL is going to contain the ID of the property, so the name that we are going to give it is ID as well. Of course, it's needless to say you can have any variable name you like over here. Okay. Then for this part, let's assume we have a home controller class because it's an element of the array. So let's enclose it within the quotations to make it a string, and then let's change the method name over here from index to something else. Let's make it get property details. So this is going to be the function name get property details, which will be called and which is supposed to be in the home controller class, not home controller. Why am I focused on home controller? This is going to be the property controller. Okay, again, we don't have this controller defined and neither this method defined, but we will get to that part later. Okay, so we have kind of 4 different type of URLs that our router should be able to handle. A request with HTTP get method, post method, and it should be able to handle some class name and its associate method. It should also be able to handle the callback functions, and it should also be able to handle dynamic URLs as well. So these are the 3 different type of URLs that the router should be able to handle besides the HTTP verbs. Okay, so this is one thing. The other thing that I want to change over here is that if you notice, we have only 2 top level or immediate directories within the Realtor backend, that is the root folder. And this public folder is not going to have much contents because anything over here is going to be accessible to the public. That means the main contents are going to be within this app folder. Now we can continue with this structure, but I feel like the app folder is quite burdened. It has a lot of content. So what I'm going to do is that I am going to change or move almost all the things into a different folder. So we will only keep, for the time being, we will only keep this router class within this app folder, And later on, when we need to include the template engine, we might have to create another folder for that one. But for the time being, I'm only going to include this router class in this app folder. So let's create a folder named source. And I'm going to move this core folder within the source models. Okay, now the source has core and models. Let's move the controllers and views. Let's change the views. Let's move it in the source folder. Okay. Good. So now we have at the top level, we have an app folder which currently only contains router.php. Then we have this public folder, and then we have the source folder. So at the top level, we have four folders. The fourth one is the vendor one. Of course, we won't be adding anything ourselves to this folder. This gets handled by the composer, so we don't need to make any changes in this folder. So for us, we have 3 top level folders: app folder, which only contains router.php file, public folder, which contains htaccess file, index.php file, and temp.php file. Okay. Then we have the source folder, which contains controllers folder, core folder, models folder, views folder. Now remember, all of them are plural except for the core, because we are going to have multiple controller classes over here. For example, the home controller that we have mentioned in the index.php class and the property controller, both of them are going to go over here. For models, we are going to have more than one model classes, so that's why the name of the folder is plural. And likewise, we are going to have more than one views that will be displayed in the browser. So that's why this folder name is plural as well. The core is going to contain one core file for each of these components: controller, model, and view, if there is a need. And the controllers that we define over here will inherit from or extend the core controller class defined in this core folder. Likewise, we might have one model class which will be extended by all the models which will be defined over here. And for the views, we'll also probably have one core defined over here, core class, or we might define it over here in the folder as well. But let's see. We will make the decision when we get there. Anyways, so this is the status for the time being. Now, since we have another top level folder in the root folder, so we are going to modify our namespace in the composer.json to account for the source folder as well. So for that, what we are going to do is that, okay, for the app folder, we have given it a different name, which is Realtor. Now this time we are going to have the same name as the actual folder. So let's make it src, 2 double backslashes. And it's going to map to our source folder. Okay, so we have 2 different namespaces at the top level: Realtor, which will contain everything in this app folder, and then we have the source folder, which will contain everything inside the source folder. Okay, since we have made changes to our JSON file, so we have to update our composer file. We have to let the composer know about this namespace as well. Now we can either write the command composer update. This is supposed to update everything, including this autoload part, as well as if we have any dependencies. Now, since we don't have any dependencies, so rather than running this update command, we are going to use another command, dump autoload. So this will only make changes to the composer.log file, which is related to this autoload part. Okay, so generating autoload files. Now the autoload file is aware of this namespace as well. Okay, let's close it. Okay, so where were we? Let's close this temp as well. Let's open index.php file. I think I've accidentally closed it. So in the public folder, we have this index.php file. Okay. Router will be able to this type of information. Now let's go to the router. Let's start with the get function. Okay, so this is the get function. We don't need to. Let's comment this one out as well. Okay. Now what this get method should do is that it should store the information that we received from these 2 parameters into these routes array permanently. So what it should do is it should do this routes, because this is an array and we want to make it an associative array. So each element of this array is going to be another array. Okay. Yeah. So each element of this routes array is going to be an array itself, and within that array, the information that we are going to store is what kind of HTTP method it is. So let's create a index name named method. So this will store either it's a get method or a post method. Now because we are defining this logic in this get method, so that means the HTTP request method is definitely get. So let's put this in capital over here. Then the other element is going to be path. and the path is going to be coming from this URL. So we can directly place in URL over here, but as you know, the routes have one part which is dynamic. So a part of path is going to be dynamic. So we need to be able to capture it. So instead of saying this URL directly, what we are going to do is that we are going to convert that into a regular expression style path. Okay, the second element is path, and to which we are giving it this URL variable. The third attribute is going to be handler, and this is going to contain this handler parameter that has been passed. Okay, let's see from this. Okay, good. We will have to come back and make changes over here, because if we store the path as it is that we have received, then this kind of URL will not be handled properly, because we need to define some mechanism through which this part would be dynamic. As it is, it's just a string enclosed within curly brackets. So if we store the path as it is, then let's go to, let's say, rent, click anywhere on any property. Now, because the actual URL contains this part, now this one doesn't match with curly brackets ID part. So that means we have to convert that part into regular expressions, which is able to match with this dynamic part. So eventually we have to make that change over here, but for the time being, let's keep it the same. And now basically for the get method, this is all we have to do. And similarly for the post method, this is all we have to do. Paste it over here. The only thing that we have to do or change is change the method from get to post. Now if you notice, both of the informations are exactly the same except for this part. So if we keep it the same, we can do it, we can get away with it, but it's not very professional, or you can say it's a junior level code. So what we are going to do is that we are going to refactor this part into a separate function, and then both of these functions will simply call that function. So in this way, this logic will only be defined once. So for that, what we are going to do is that we are going to define a private function, because this function is not supposed to be called from anywhere else, like this index.php file. So let's define a private function named register, and to this we have to provide 3 pieces of information: this URL and handler, plus the first one is going to be this method. So the first parameter, let's make it method, and for the rest, pass back this URL and handler parameters. Now within the body, let's cut this part from the post. We have to cut it from the get as well, and paste it over here within the register. Okay, now for the method, let's put back this method parameter that it has received. For the path, it's going to be this URL. For the handler, it's going to be this handler. Now for both get and post, we simply are going to call this function. So this register, because it's its own method, so this register. And the first method for the get function is going to be get. So get. Second method is going to be both of these. Copy and paste. Okay. Now let's copy this and paste it in the post method. So post method is also calling this register method, but for the first parameter is going to be capital post, uppercase post. So post URL and handler. Now this way you don't see any kind of repetition of code anywhere. So this is more professional than the one that we created earlier. Okay. So basically the logic that was almost 99% similar to both of these functions, we have extracted into a separate function, and both of these functions, get and post, are calling that function with the mention of the change that both of these functions need to have. Okay, so this part is almost done, except for, as we discussed earlier, this path. If we store it as it is, then it will never be able to match this URL with this kind of URL, because this part keeps changing. So now we have to ensure that the path that we are storing is able to capture this dynamically changing part as well. So for that, we have to take advantage of regular expressions. Using regular expressions, we can make it dynamic. So what we are going to do is that we are going to define another function. Let's make this one private as well, because it doesn't need to be called outside this router function. So private function, let's make it convert to regular expression. Okay, so it will be given a variable named path, and it will also return the path. But first of all, we have to figure out how to convert this path as a dynamic string, which is able to understand that, or able to match this part with dynamically changing this part. Now, because we know that this convert to regular expression is supposed to return the path after making it understand the dynamic aspect. So obviously we are going to have a return statement. Now to make that happen, we already have a function provided by PHP, which is called preg replace. Now this preg replace takes 3 parameters. Well, it can actually take more than 3 parameters, but for our purposes, the first 3 parameters are enough. So let me just tell you what those parameters are. Then we will think about how to make them into regular expression style language. So the first part is whatever is the first element or a parameter, it's a pattern. The second one is going to be replacement string. And the third one is going to be input string. This pattern means regular expression pattern. Okay, so the first parameter is a regular expression pattern. Then the second parameter is replacement string, and the third parameter is the input string. Okay, I have disabled an extension which was kind of distracting. So everywhere it was giving us hints like what is the return type of a function, what are these parameters called, and such type of things. So they were getting mixed up with our code, so it was confusing. So I have disabled that extension. It's easier to see and understand the code. Okay. So for the preg replace function, the first parameter is basically regular expression. The second parameter is actually a string. So even if you write it in the form of a regular expression, it gets converted into a string, and that string is used within the function. So this part is always a regular expression. This part, even if it looks like a regular expression, so this one, even if it's going to look like a regular expression, but it will get converted into a string. Hence the emphasis string. Okay. The third part is the input string. So basically, whatever input string we are going to give to this function, this preg replace function, it will search for the pattern that we define over here. So within this string, it will look for a pattern or a string or a part of string which matches this regular expression pattern defined over here. If such pattern has been matched by this string, then in this string, that part will be replaced by this string. So suppose if the pattern is let's say ABC. Now because this is a regular expression, so we have to enclose it within double slashes to make it a regular expression. Then the second part is, let's say, 111, and the third part is ABCDEF, ABCDEF. So this is the string that we are given as input. So within this string, we have to look for this pattern, which is a simple pattern. We have to basically look for 3 characters A, B, C. If such characters are found over here, then those characters will be replaced by this 111. So the string that will be returned to us will be 111 DEF, 111 DEF. So this will be the string that will be returned. Okay. Now we don't have a simple string, we have a dynamic string. So we have to capture that part first. So we have to mention this part is a regular expression. Now a regular expression, as we just discussed, is enclosed within some kind of delimiters. So usually it's forward slashes. So everything needs to be defined within these forward slashes to make it a regular expression. Other delimiter, the common delimiter is hash as well. So it's your choice if you want to use forward slash or hashes. I'm going to use both. So first I'm going to use this forward slash, and later on if we need to use regular expression anywhere else, we will be using hash instead of forward slash as a delimiter so that we can see both of them into action. Okay. So anything defined within these forward slashes will be considered a regular expression. So now we have to say capture everything which is enclosed within these curly brackets. Now in regular expressions, these curly brackets have a specific meaning already associated with them. We don't want that meaning associated with them, so we have to escape these 2 characters. So we are going to use backslash to escape these 2 curly brackets default meaning. Now these 2 curly brackets are treated just like simple curly brackets rather than some other meaning which makes sense or which has been defined by default to regular expression. So now these 2 curly brackets actually represent, where is our index.php? These 2 curly brackets. And now we have to say capture everything within these 2 curly brackets. The only consideration that we have to take into account is sometimes we have a URL which has 2 dynamic parts like this as well. So if that was the case, then we would have written a URL like this, some variable name. So we have to make sure that is not the case. So for that, what we are going to say is that capture everything as long as it's not a forward slash. Because slash means some other part of URL. So we have to say everything other than that forward slash. So what we can say, everything except for forward slash. So we don't want this forward slash. Now again, forward slash has a specific meaning in regular expression. So again, we have to escape it by associating it with backslash. So now this forward slash has been prepended with backslash. So now this forward slash is treated just like a normal forward slash. So we have to say everything except for this forward slash. So that means we want to say everything which is not forward slash. So to say that, we have to put a caret in front of it. In regular expressions, if this caret is defined anywhere other than the start of the regular expression, like we defined in the HP axis over here, like this, if it's in the center or somewhere, then it means the negation of something. So we are saying not caret. So capture something that is not caret, but this will only look for one character. We have to make it into more than one character. So we have to enclose it within these square brackets, and we have to add a plus sign with it. If something is enclosed within a square brackets, that means it's a group of continuous characters. Like within a square bracket, we can put A-Z. So that means all the characters beginning from A up to Z. If we say C-F, so all the characters between C and F will be considered. So now we have enclosed this slash within this square bracket. So it will say all the characters except this forward slash, and there can be more than one character. So asterisk means 0 or more characters, and that makes it 0 means it could be, the string could be empty as well. But over here we are ensuring that there is at least one character. So therefore we have to put in this plus sign. So it has to have at least one character. Within the curly brackets, we need to have at least one character. And it should not be a slash. But of course, there can be more than one character. Okay, so this is the regular expression that we want to capture. So basically, so we are saying everything that starts and ends with a curly bracket, and everything in between, as long as it's not a forward slash, it will be captured as well. So that's the pattern. Okay, now before we define the second parameter, let's go back to our index.php file. So if this is the URL, let me copy, let's say, okay, so if this is the URL, now from this URL, it will only match or try to look for the pattern, this pattern over here. Anything enclosed in curly brackets, including the curly brackets. Now, because we have enclosed this pattern inside the parentheses over here, so that means we can refer to it using back referencing variables. So now what we want to do in order to link this kind of URL with this kind of URL, we basically want to convert it into a regular expression, which looks something like property slash. So after this property, which is constant, we want to say whatever is the string or the name given over here within these curly brackets, we want to convert it something like ID or whatever is the name, ID equals to this value given over here. Something like that. So this is what we want to try to accomplish. Now to accomplish that, we have to define this logic in regular expressions. So we have already captured this part through back referencing. So this part matches whatever is defined into curly brackets and stores them into a back referencing variable. The default one is $1, $2, since this is the very first group. So whatever has been captured is available in the $1 variable. So what we want to say, replace this with, again, come back to a capturing group. But this time, this capturing group should be a named capturing group. When we say named capturing group, it means we don't have to rely on the default names like $1, $2, or $3. Instead, we can give our own name to the variable, to the value that is going to be captured. So what we want to say is that the group that is going to be captured, it should have a name which matches this name. So the way to say that is within these parentheses, we have to put a question mark, then capital P. Now this group actually becomes a named capturing group. So the next thing is we have to put in these angle brackets, and within those angle brackets, we can define any name we want. Then whatever value will get captured by this capturing group will be stored with the name defined over here within these angle brackets. So basically we want to say whatever is the name given over here should be the name of that capturing group. Now in our case it's ID, so we want it to be something like this ID. But we have that ID in our back reference variable that is going to be given through this regular expression. So because this is using a simple capturing group which is not a named capturing group, so the default name which will contain the value over here will be $1. So over here we have to say $1. So basically what we are saying is whatever gets captured over here, put it over here as the name of that group. Now what shall this capturing group should capture? So we want the same thing that has been captured over here. So copy this part. Sorry, not the parentheses, because we already have parentheses. So everything within these parentheses, copy. And we have to place it over here. Now this is the capturing group, and this whole thing is defining the named capturing group. Okay, so in our case, this is going to be the string. So we want to replace this thing. We want to replace this whole thing with this thing. So in this way, if we change the name over here from ID to, let's say, URL, then this one will represent this URL. If we change it to, let's say, param over here, then this $1 will be then this $1 will be replaced by this param. So whatever is over here will be the name of this named capturing group. So this is what we want. So copy and then delete everything. Let's go back to the router and place it over here as replacement string. So now Control Z. Okay. So now when this is the URL that is being sent through this get method, this thing will get replaced by this thing property, and then this is the dynamic part. Okay. So it will be simply the string that will be returned is this thing. So this is what we are doing over here. We are extracting that curly brackets ID with this part, which is more dynamic. Okay. Then the third parameter is the actual input string. Now in our case, it's available in this path variable. So let's pass in that variable path. So this convert to regular expression has simply returned us a string, but now that string is returned in the format of a regular expression. Okay. So now what we are going to do is that, where is it? Okay. Change this path, value of path from direct URL to this convert to regular expression and pass in the path, which will again simply, when given this string, it will convert into this string, and now this path contains this string. Okay, remember this is a string yet. Now as far as the registration part is concerned, this part, that part is done. So these two parts we have yet to define, but both of them are going to be defined within the dispatch method. But before we define any logic for the dispatch method, what we are going to do is that we are simply echoing out what we currently contain in this routes array to see that what this convert to regular expression is doing to our URLs. So let's echo tree, copy paste our routes. Now within the index.php class file, let's call that route function, dispatch function, and see what does it displays for us. Let's go to home, undefined variable path on line in router on line 20. Let's go to line 20, path equals, okay, this is not path, this is URL. The parameter that we are passing is URL, so we have to use this one. Okay. Refresh, get triggered 3 times. Undefined variable routes in index on line 11, index.php. Okay, this is router. Okay. Let's refresh, get triggered, warning variable routes online, undefined variable routes on line 34. Okay, this message, so this one is executed 3 times. Get triggered, let's delete it. Then it says, what was the error? Undefined variable routes on line 34. On line 34. Okay, it's actually this routes. Let's refresh. Okay, so this is the routes array. At index 0, we have an array as its element, which has 3 elements. Method, its value is get. Path, its value is home. Handler, which is again an array with home controller and index method. Then at index 1, method is path, path is home, handler is array, home controller, index. At index 2, we have method get, path is test, handler is a closure object because it's a function. This one, callback function. Then at index array, index 3, a method is get, path is property ID. It's the same one. Why? Okay, maybe because we have placed in space and there is no space. So if you notice, there is no space between the ID and these 2 curly brackets. So maybe that's the error. So let's remove this space and let's remove this space. Let's refresh. Yeah, now it's working. Okay. So the ID got replaced by this one. Now this is, where's the name? We don't need to put in this escaping character because this is not a regular expression. This is a string sort of. So this is a sort of string. So we did not use to put in that escaping character. Okay. Let's refresh. Still nothing. Okay. Also, we need to remove this because this whole thing is a named capturing group. So if we were placing this into another parenthesis, it was turning into a separate capturing group, which we did not want. So hopefully this has resolved the problem. Still nothing. Now if you notice over here, these two are angle brackets. So maybe these angle brackets are treated differently by the browser. So what we are going to do is that let's cut it. Let's use a function called HTML special characters and pass everything to this HTML special characters function as a parameter. So now whatever gets returned will pass through this function, which will replace these brackets with HTML entities. So now hopefully the browser will not have any difficulty or any kind of issue displaying these angle brackets. So let's refresh, and now you can see this ID over here. Now just to give you some more insight, let's change ID with ABC and refresh, and now you can see it has been automatically changed to ABC. Now remember, I removed this backslash over here. So we had earlier put backslash over here like this one over here, but here we don't need to use it because this will convert into a string literal, so it's okay. However, if we put this slash over here, it will still do the work. So there was no reason to remove this slash. It will still work fine. Okay, so now you can see over here, the reason that we are placing this slash over here is because if you notice, we are using these forward slashes as a regular expression delimiters. So if you believe that later on you will be using whatever gets returned over here as another regular expression by enclosing this returned value into these forward slashes, then you must place this backslash over here. However, we will not be using these forward slashes as delimiters. Instead, we will use hash symbols. So those hash symbols will not have any issue with this forward slash. It will not treat this forward slash as a delimiter. So it's fine if you want to remove this backslash, which escapes this forward slash. Okay. So now this gets returned. Now let's remove this because we had only enclosed this into HTML special characters because we wanted to print it on the screen. Now, since we are not printing it on the screen, so we don't need to pass it through the HTML special characters function. Okay, now we can comment this out. So now we know that this thing gets returned. Okay. Let's change it back to ID. Okay, now we have to do the actual logic of dispatching. So let's delete it. It's too much clutter. Let's delete this thing as well. Okay. Now what we need to do is we have to go through each of those routes one by one. So for each routes, again I forgot this routes is one route at a time. Okay, before we move any further, we need to figure out what kind of parameters this dispatch method requires in order to perform its job. So we need to pass it the HTTP method and the URL, the path. So method and path. So within this for each loop, we have to check if this route, now we know each route contains method, path, and handler, 3 indexes. We are looking for this one. If whatever is stored there, if it's equal to whatever has been passed through over here. So $method. If these two matches, then we can proceed further. So far we have only checked the HTTP actions. Either it's a get method or post method. So if the HTTP methods match, then we have to check if the path matches whatever is defined over here. Either this path with this path, or this path, or this path, or this path. It has to match any one of these. So if we are going to use regular expression, thread match, so we are only doing match over here. Here we were not only matching, we were replacing the string as well. So over here we are just matching. If thread match, so the first one is going to be the regular expression pattern, which we are going to get from here. So this is regular expression pattern. We only have to put in the delimiters. They turn it into a regular expression. Now, since we have removed the backslash over here, so what we are going to do is that we are not using forward slashes as delimiters because we haven't escaped this forward slash over here. Had we escaped this forward slash over here, then we could have used this as well. But because we haven't, therefore we are going to stick with hash. So this is the starting delimiter, hash, then route, and the index name is path. And then again we have to attach the ending delimiter. So now this, whatever was stored in this route path as a string, because we have appended at the beginning and end with hash symbols, and because this is the first parameter of this fragment, so this acts as a regular expression pattern. So this is the pattern that we have to look for. And the second one is the string in which we have to search for this pattern. So the string will come from this path. So copy this and paste it over here. So this is the second parameter. And the third parameter is the array named matches. You can give it any name you like. So if in this string, this pattern gets matched, it will get stored into this matches array. If there are 3 different parts in the string or 3 different substrings in this path which matches this pattern, they will be stored as separate array elements in this matches array. So the first element of this array will contain the whole string. Then the rest of the elements will contain all the substrings that matches this pattern. Okay, so if no match is found, then this matches array will contain just one element, which will be the whole string. So this is how it works. So for the time being, we are simply just printing whatever we receive. So let's again put back pre, copy paste, closing pre, and in the middle print underscore all, and let's simply put in the matches. So let's see what it prints. Okay, now to actually call this function, we have to go back to index.php, and to this dispatch, we have to pass in the string over here. So the first parameter is the HTTP request method that we have to pass. So therefore, we are going to use server global variable and its request method. So this server global elements request method index will contain the HTTP request method, and the second one is going to be the path. Now, if you remember, due to this HT access, we can use the get global variables, this URL index, to access this part. So this is what we are going to do. Let's go to index. Okay, so we are going to say $_global get and its URL. Okay, so now let's see what gets printed. Let's refresh. Undefined property realtor router route on line 30. This route, okay, we don't need to put in this because we have created this variable within the for each loop. Okay. Now, as you know, this one doesn't have any dynamic parts. Therefore, this array contains, the matches array contain only one element, which is the whole path. And in our case, it's just home. So now let's try to put in property /6. Okay, so index 0 contains the whole path, property /6. So the first index contains the whole URL, which is property /6, okay, as we discussed earlier. Then the second one captures, this is present at the index, which is a named index, which matches this word ID that we have already captured. So ID equals value 6. Then this part is kind of redundant, but this is how PHP's regular expression works. Because we got this ID, that was a capturing group, a named capturing group. So this got stored as here. But this comes from a capturing group. So this value comes from named capturing group, and this value comes from first capturing group, which are in fact one and same. But this is the behavior of the PHP. We can't do anything about it. So we will see kind of redundancy over here. These two things represent the same thing. We have used the named capturing group. So when you use named capturing group rather than just capturing groups, so you will see a kind of repetition. The first element will contain the name of the named capturing group and the value. The second will contain just the index and the value captured by the capturing group. Okay, so you have to bear that in mind. Okay, so this is what we are getting. Now let's comment this out because we might need it later. So if the path matches with the path provided over here, then the things that get stored in this matches array is what we saw in the browser. Okay, now we have to play with this array. So what we need to do is that we have to search this array and look for its indexes that are named indexes rather than numbered indexes. So if you notice, index 0 is a numbered index, and this index, the first element will also be a numbered index, index 0. Then the second one is a named index, and third one is a numbered index. So we have to search this array for named indexes, because then we will extract all the named indexes and its values. When we do not have any then we don't have any named index over here. So that means we don't have any dynamic parameter passed either. But if we have any named index, like in the previous case, then those will turn into parameters because we know ID is a dynamic parameter. So now we have to extract this because this will act as a parameter. So if there is a match, then now we have to search if this matches array actually contain a named index. So if, in fact, we don't need to check it, we can use a function, a default function that will do that for us. So this is called array filter. The first parameter is going to be the array that we want to filter for the named indexes. And now we have to define the criteria. That is, we want to only look for the named indexes. So the second parameter is going to be a function. We are passing a function as a string. So is string. This is actually a function, but we are only passing it as a string. Basically, we are passing in the name of the function. So each element of this matches array will be passed as a parameter to this is a string function. And if that element is actually a string, like this 0 is not a string, this 1 is not a string, but ID is a string. So each element of this matches array will pass through this is a string array. And if it is true, now we have to define the filtering key, that if this function returns true, what shall we do with that element? So now we want to say we want to extract only the key of that function, that is this ID. We want to extract this ID. So we have to say array filter use key. So we want to filter the array based on the key. So we want to extract or filter out the key if the element of that array is actually a string. Now if anything gets returned, we want to store it into a variable called param. Let's make it plural because we can have more than one array element matching this criteria. Okay, now we've got params. Now this param could be empty as well. So far we have got the HTTP GET method and we have matched the URL as well. And if this URL contains parameters, we have extract those parameters into the params array as well. Now we are ready to execute or call the function or call the appropriate class and its appropriate method. Now let's go to indexes. Now if you notice over here, this one, the second element of route could be a callback function. So the first thing that we have to check that if this route is actually a callback function. If it is a callback function, then we have to immediately execute this callback function. So that's the logic that we are going to define next. So we have to check if or is callable. So is callable is a PHP function to which whatever we pass, it will let us know if that element is callable or not. So something is callable if you can call it to execute it. And since functions are callable, so it will return true for callback functions. So we have to check now our callable function is inside this route. So so this handler contains the function or could contain the function. So we have to check if is callable route and index name is handler. So what we can say is if that is the case, then return. Now to call a function, now we can't say something like that and pass the params. This we can't do that. Well, technically you can call it like that, but the problem is, so we know this params is going to be an array, so that means whatever is the function, so this function, it is supposed to accept an array as its parameters. If it doesn't, then it's going to create problems. So instead, what we are going to do is that we are making it more flexible so that it can handle any number of parameters. So return call user function array. So this will call. So to this we can pass the function name and parameters as an array. So it will take care of if the parameters needs to be an array or simple variable. So whatever is the cases, it's able to appropriately call the function with the right number and type of parameters if those can be extracted from this params array. So we are returning call user function array. So basically we are executing this call user function array and its result we are returning. Okay. So to this call user function array, we pass two parameters. The first is the callback function and the second is the list of parameters as array. So in our case, the name of the callback function is stored in route index handler and the parameters are available over here in the params array. Now this could be empty as well. Like in our case, we don't have any parameters to this callback function. So in our case, this params is going to be an empty array. Now this will execute the function properly and it will return the result. So let's test it. Okay, for this callback function, the route is test. Undefined variable param. Okay, S is missing. Okay, this is callback function talking. So we are successfully triggering this callback function. Okay, so our router is able to handle this type of routes. Now, if that is not the case, that is this route, okay, if this route handler is not a callback function, like over here, this is not a callback function, rather it's an array. So for that, we have to check. So this is if this is its value or the body, then else if we have to check if this is actually an array. So is array, and to that we have to pass route handler. So if route handler is actually an array rather than a callable function, in that case, we know that at index 0 we have the name of the class, and at index 1 we have the name of the method that needs to be executed. So let's extract those pieces of information. Let's create a variable class name, and that's available at route handler index 0. Copy paste it. At index 1 we have method name. Okay, so this is just the class name. Now we have to attach to this class name the full path. So let's create a variable file name or file path. So currently this router is in the app folder. We have to go one folder up, then we have to go into the source folder, then controllers folder, and there we will have that class name. So all our controllers are going to be there because we are actually representing the controllers over here. Currently we do not have any controllers, so let's define one. Home controller.php. Let's have just one for the time being. Okay, so anyway, so where were we? We are in the app folder, go one folder up, then we have source folder, controller folder, and there we have this. Okay, so that's the path. So path is going to be go one folder up, so that's the root directory, then go to source folder, then we have controllers folder, and then let's attach the class name. So this class name only contains the name. Let's attach .php as well. Okay, now we have to check if this file actually exists. So if file exists, file path, if it exists, then to this class name we have to append the namespace. So the namespace is going to be source folder. It will start with the source folder. Let's go to the composer.json. Okay, so anything that's in the source folder will start with this namespace. Okay, so that means we have to go back to the controller class. Let's define some basic contents. This is home controller class, okay? And namespace is going to be source. We have to mention this, okay? Now the class is going to be home controller class, and it's supposed to have one method at least. So public function index, simply print this is index method of home controller class. Okay, so this home controller is in the namespace source with capital S. Okay, now let's go back to the router. So to this class name we have to append the namespace. So now class name equals source backslash. Then because after the source we have the controller directory, so the namespace will match the rest of the directory hierarchy. So okay, so that means we have to go back to home controller. So it's not just source, then we have to attach slash. So namespace is source / controller. Okay, so this is the namespace. Now let's go back to the router. Source, then attach controller backslash. Let's make it controllers. And we have to make sure that this single slash followed by this single parenthesis does not act as a escaping character. So we have to put in another slash. So now this one acts simply as a normal closing parenthesis, and these two slashes act as just normal slash. So now this first slash is escaping the meaning of this second slash, which in return simply behaves as a single slash. We did not encounter this problem over here because this slash was not followed by anything which has a specific meaning in the PHP. But over here, because this slash was followed by a quotation mark, so it was changing the meaning of that quotation mark. We didn't want to, so we changed the meaning of a slash. So normally when there is a backslash, it changes the meaning of the next character. and we did not want that, so we are putting another slash. Now this changes the meaning of single slash. I hope I'm clear. Okay, now dot, and let's put back class name. So now this becomes source, class name becomes source controller's class name, whatever is a class name. So now we have the proper name of the class name. So now we can create the instance of this class name. So class instance equals new class name. Next, we have to check if this method exists within this class name. So if method exists, so the method comes from this method name, but the first param is object, in which it will check if this method exists. So the first parameter is class instance. So within this instance, if there is this method name, if it exists, now we can execute it. So not only the class exists, but method exists as well. Let's remove this because we only have one statement. So let's copy this, copy, paste, return call user function array. Now this time the first parameter is going to be an array, which will have not only the class instance, copy. The second parameter is going to be the method, copy, paste. So this time, to call user function array, the first parameter is also an array which contains the object and the method, the object and the method that needs to be executed on that object. And the second one is the parameters array. Okay, that is it. But if none of these things exist, then in that case, what we want to do is, where is it? So this is the start of the function, and this is the closing bracket. So over here. So if none of them is, so if none of these statements matches over here, we will eventually end up over here. However, if any of these functions, if any of these statements return true, so because of these return statements, the function will terminate before it reaches over here. But if it reaches over here, that means none of the conditions have been found true. So that means none of the routes have been matched. In that case, we want to throw a new error. So throw new exception. So we are putting a forward slash at the beginning because this exception is a global namespace, the default namespace of PHP. So all the objects and functions that are available by default with the PHP, they are present in the default namespace. So if we want to get something from that namespace, we have to prepend it with this backslash. So this means this exceptions is found in the global namespace. So slash exception, and to that we have to found pass route not found. Now we only have home controller, so let's see if we are able to trigger the index method of the home. Undefined variable class name on line 39. Okay, this is call name. Let's change it to class name. Route not found. Okay, so we are getting this exception, route not found. So that means this is the message that we have created, we have passed into the exception object that gets thrown if no route has been matched. This one. So we know that we were able to handle the callback functions up to this part. So that means whatever is happening, it's happening after this part. So if is array route handler, so we have to check if we are reaching, if this else if is executing or not. So that means if this part is returning true or not. So we are simply echoing something within else if. Let's see if we get this message. So if we get this message, that it means at least this part is returning true. Yes, we are getting this. Okay, so class name is route handler is index 0 and this is index 1, should be fine. Let's comment this and echo class name and method name. Let's see what we are getting over here. Home controller, this is fine, and index, that's also fine. Okay, let's comment this out. Okay, now we have to check if this file exists. So Control X, let's place it over here. So we are within this if file exists part. Let's uncomment this. So if we get this message again within else if, that means we are reaching this part successfully. Okay, so we are not reaching this part. So that means something goes wrong over here. In class name.php. What we can do is that let's echo out file path. Source controllers, home, oh, dot is missing. Okay. So home controller, and it's supposed to be home controller dot php. Okay. Dot over here. Okay. I think we are getting, okay, within else if this is index method of home controller class. Okay. So now we are getting there successfully, but let's comment out all the echoes. So this is echo and this one as well. Okay. Save it. Now it says this is the index method of home controller class. So in the home controller, we have this index method. So this is definitely executing because we are seeing this message in the browser. So that means we are successfully able to trigger the appropriate controller and appropriate method. So that means our router is working properly. Now we only have to check these kind of dynamic URLs. So for that, let's create another controller. Let's go to index first, index file. So where is it? Okay. So when the ID is property ID, the controller class is property controller, and the method name is get property details. Okay. So let's create this class in the controller. So let's create another class, property controller.php. Okay. Now within that class, we have to create this method. Copy property controller. Let's create a namespace, and its source / controllers. So this is the namespace. Now let's create the class property controller. It needs a method get property details, paste, and it requires an array, a parameter ID. Okay, so for the time being, let's just print out the message. The ID of the property shown is $ID. Now this ID will be successfully passed because we are able to handle that situation as well using these params array. Okay. So let's check property /5. The ID of the property shown is 5. Let's change it to 8. The ID of the property shown is 8. Let's make it 12. So that means we are successfully able to handle the dynamic URLs as well. Now the router part is working properly. We are able to successfully trigger the appropriate controllers as well. Now the things that remain is the database connectivity and its link with the model and controller. And then we will also include a templating engine for the views as well. But I think we have already had a very long session. So we are going to end this video over here. The rest will continue in the upcoming video. I hope you really liked the video and you really understood how the router works. And if you like, you can comment on my video, like my video, subscribe and share with your friends. That would make my day. Thank you so much. Happy coding. Bye-bye.